Welcome, life science learners, to another installment for today. Today we're focusing on the menstrual cycle and understanding how this occurs. It's important that we recognize where we are today. We've spent some time previously looking at the male and female reproductive systems. Today our focus is on understanding exactly what happens during the menstrual cycle. We will look at events that occur in the ovary as well as in the uterus during this lesson. What is the difference between menstruation and ovulation? I hope that you kind of think through these questions as we get through this presentation. In our lesson today, we're going to focus on the key concepts around menstruation and ovulation. We're going to spend some time looking at the development and the structures within the ovary. I'd spend some time looking at some of the hormones and understand their relationship to the ovary. One of the key concepts, as we discussed, was ovulation. What do we understand by the concept of ovulation? Let's try and unpack the word ovulation. It's got reference to the organ called the ovary, and hence we know that ovulation has got to do with some process that occurs in the ovary. Ovulation is the release of a ripe egg, which we often refer to correctly in scientific term as the ovum. And this is from the ovary. So the release of an egg or an ovum from the ovary is regarded as ovulation. The egg is released when the cavity surrounding breaks open and in response to hormones that are released. When ovulation occurs, we see that the ovum moves into the fallopian tube and becomes available for fertilization. As you would look at my diagram here, a recap on this is the female reproductive system. We can see the ovaries situated in that space there. We also can zoom in on the release of an egg. And this release of an egg from the ovary is referred to as ovulation. And so this egg now travels down the fallopian tube in anticipation of a sperm cell that might approach. And so we say that that process of releasing the egg into the fallopian tube is called ovulation. Let's try and look at the concept of menstruation. Menstruation describes the female period. The menstrual cycle begins when a woman gets her periods. The menstrual blood which leaves her body are products shed from the uterus, which is the inner lining of the uterus called the endometrium. Let's try and understand the context around menstruation. So during the development of the ovary and the ovule or the ovum within the ovary, we see that the endometrial lining of the uterus begins to become vascular or thickened. This process occurs as hormones are released from the ovary. However, at the end of the cycle, the beginning of a new cycle is marked with the release of the endometrium. And this inner lining of the endometrium is shredded away. And that process of releasing the lining of the endometrium is called menstruation. Okay, it's important that we understand the hormones that are associated with these processes. So we're going to discuss these in detail, but it's important that we recognize that the hormone estrogen, progesterone, which are produced from the ovary, play a significant role in both the development of the endometrial lining as well as processes within the ovary. We also need to look at FSH, which stands for follicle stimulating hormone, and LH, which is luteinizing hormone. And these are released from the pituitary gland and play an important role in regulating the development within the ovary and the uterine lining. Let's look at the structures within the ovary. We're going to look at the primary oocyte, we're going to look at the graphene follicle, as well as the corpus luteum. This is a diagram that shows a longitudinal section through the ovary. When we look at this in detail, we see a series of events occurring. Right here at the start, we see the primary follicle, which is shown to develop and mature gradually from a primary follicle into what we refer to here as a mature graphene follicle. We also know that the graphene follicle around day 14 ruptures and releases an ovum. This process is referred to as ovulation. We also know that after ovulation, that graphene follicle now forms a structure called the corpus luteum. So, an overview of the primary oocyte. This is the oocyte that arises from the oogonium via the process of oogenesis, so essentially the development of the egg through meiosis, and will give rise to a secondary oocyte and a polar body, which is another small structure that divides from the original oocyte. This occurs at the end of the first meiotic division. Okay, and so that points to the development of this follicle here, which we refer to as the primary follicle. Let's look at the graphene follicle as I've mentioned. The graphene follicle is the follicular stage at the end of the first meiotic division, but before ovulation can occur. It therefore contains what we call the haploid oocyte. The corpus luteum, as I mentioned, would be that structure which houses the mature egg, and once that egg has been released from the corpus luteum, we find that, from the graphene follicle, we find that what is left is the corpus luteum. And this is the structure that is essential for the conception to occur and to maintain pregnancy, because it produces an important hormone called progesterone. So guys, we've looked at a cross-section through the ovary, we've looked at the primary follicle, I've pointed out the graphene follicle, we've also mentioned the process of ovulation occurring here, and we've discussed that that graphene follicle now becomes the corpus luteum, which we see gradually degenerating over the next period of while. Well guys, you've done well. We've looked at some detailed concepts. Let's take a little break, freshen up, and we hope to see you back so that we can do a bit more planning and understanding around these content.